So, as many of you know, I build a lot of tank models on this channel from a multitude of different manufacturers, be it Tamiya, Dragon, Aurora, Academy, Armortech, whatever. If it's got tracks and needs to be built, I'm going to do it. However, there's this one company that one of my subscribers is just a die-hard fan of, and he's always requesting me to go ahead and build some more kits from this one particular company. Well, if you're watching this out there, I am definitely answering the mail. Quite literally, actually. What's in this box here? Well, this video is most certainly going to be for you. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale German Löwe heavy tank prototype. The model in this video is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This model here is built predominantly out of the box. However, I went ahead and went outside the kit in a few areas to improve the model to bring it up to the condition that we have here. In this video, we're going to be giving this model a thorough in-box review. I'm going to be going over several of the kit's aspects, its features, as well as some areas to look out for and possibly also improve. All this information is going to be discussed in this video, so sit back, relax, because there's going to be a bit of content coming right at you. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle over here is the Panzerkampfwagen VII Löwe. The Löwe, or German for lion, was a proposed super heavy tank that was designed by Krupp and proposed in the 1941-1942 timeframe. At this time, the Tiger I was entering into full production. However, it was deemed that even the Tiger I, being as powerful and as heavily armored as it is, wasn't going to be sufficient enough at dealing with the type of vehicles that were going to be encountered by Germany as the war progressed. So the designers at Krupp went ahead, hit the drawing board for a vehicle that was even more heavily armored and even more heavily armed. The vehicle was going to incorporate several new design features that were at the time being incorporated on other German tank designs that were coming off the drawing board and also entering into production, namely the sloped armor appearance and layout of the Panther. If we look at the Tiger I, basically that layout is very similar to what we saw on the Panzer IV and the Panzer III and the vehicles that came around that time. However, with the Panther's design incorporating more sloped angle plates, this was going to be deemed a more efficient design as it gave the vehicle much better armor protection compared to the boxy appearance found on the Tiger I. However, just like with the Tiger I, and same is true for the Panther, the vehicle was going to utilize an interleaved row wheel suspension, as this also gave some extra armor protection to the lower hull, and it also really helped with distributing the large heavy weight of this vehicle on softer terrain, thus improving mobility, which it was definitely going to need because this vehicle was going to weigh in at about 70 tons, which was mammoth for the time. In terms of armament, there were several options that were proposed to be fitted to this vehicle, one of which was being the 10.5 centimeter L70, the 15 centimeter L38, an 8.8 centimeter L71, or a 12.8 centimeter KWK 44. One of the more interesting aspects on the Löwe's design was going to be the design and material composition of the turret. Prior to this vehicle over here, all of the German World War II tanks utilized slab plate as much as possible. Very thick sections of armor plate that were pressed and rolled into certain shapes and then puzzled together in order to get the fit. This is what we see on the Tiger, the Panther, King Tiger, even the Moss. However, the Löwe was going to incorporate an all-cast turret, which was something that the Germans didn't really do all that large on their vehicles. Generally, when you see castings on German tanks, they're for smaller units like final drives, hatches, grills, things like that, and of course mantlets. But for an entire all-cast turret, this was something that just wasn't done, and it was generally something that was done by the Allies, specifically with the Americans, with the Sherman. While the design work was going on at Krupp, two proposals were thought up of. The first one was more or less a traditional type configuration where we have the turret essentially in the middle of the vehicle. However, the second variant was a bit more unorthodox, where it had the turret located all the way in the back while the front was dedicated to the automotive. And this is something that looks very strange to our eyes today. However, it was something that was commonly done or proposed by the Germans during World War II. If we go ahead and look at similar type of vehicles from the period, you have the Ferdinand, the Elephant, and the Nashorn that all had a configuration very similar to this. Even though those are casemate designs, the concept of having the fighting compartment all located in the rear was one that did turn out to be a workable platform. However, unlike those vehicles, this one was actually going to have a fully revolving turret. And a similar design was also proposed by Porsche while coming up with the King Tiger, and that vehicle had a design very similar to this. However, that is also going to be a topic for another video for another day. And if this design still looks a bit funky to us, well, then look no further, because it's still with us today on vehicles like the Merkava, as well as also the new M10 Booker. Even though both of those vehicles have nothing in terms of design lineage to the Löwe, it's interesting to see that that concept has stuck around with us today, and it's something that has been a bit more refined compared to the early days of the 1940s. Back to the Löwe, neither one of these vehicles actually ever entered into production or left the drawing board. While the designers were doing their thing, the program was abandoned, and the resources were then redevoted and reshifted for both the King Tiger as well as the Moss. And both of those vehicles, of course, progressed with their development and actually entered into production. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the models first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies us with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35th scale German VK7201K Löwe German heavy tank prototype kit from Amusing Hobby. This model here is a really cool addition, and it's something I've been wanting to add in my collection for a little under 9 years, basically when these kits were first released back in 2014. The kits, of course, are made by the company Amusing Hobby, and Amusing Hobby is a model company that actually has carved a pretty nice niche into the market, and they are known for producing very well-engineered plastic model kits. They were also known for a while of producing kits that were outside of the beaten path and were of very interesting and unique subject matters. That's not so much true today, as they've kind of broadened their field a little bit. I've seen them producing kits like T80s or T72s, if I'm not mistaken. But for a while, they were the type of company that were producing bizarre vehicles like the one that you see here. Amusing Hobby starts, or I should say has its roots back in the late 2000s, early 2010s timeframe, where their first kit was the German Neue by Fahrzeug heavy tank, which for a while was another one of those vehicles that was just ignored for the longest period of time until Trumpeter eventually caught up on it. But this was basically the type of kits that they were producing. Move forward a couple of years, in 2012, they released the Löwe German heavy tank prototype, and this was a very cool kit, and it was also one that was absent in the hobby for the longest period of time. In fact, as a side note, I actually built the Amusing Hobby Löwe, and that was a really popular video. So much so that another YouTuber basically used my build as inspiration to build his own and paint it basically identical to mine. And by the way, if you're watching this, yes, I saw what you did, and yes, it was kind of cool that you did give me a little bit of credit and a little quick shout out. Another individual actually used my build as inspiration for his own build, only his was a digital computer animated type vehicle, but still it represented the Löwe and was painted in the exact same manner as I built on the one that's on YouTube. So that's also pretty cool to see when on a random Google search it popped up. That was kind of cool. Regardless, that was the one version of the Löwe. However, there was another version that was proposed with the turret in the back, or the Turm Hinten variant, and that is the version that we have here. This kit was released by Amusing Hobby in 2014, and it's basically been on the market ever since. This particular example I picked up from Amazon about 6 months ago during the spring. I'm filming this in November, so, you know, it was a spring prime event, and I might as well take advantage of it, so I went ahead and bought this and another Amusing Hobby kit. At the same time, that one will probably make its way onto the YouTube channel at some point, shortly after this one here, but regardless, this was one of the kits that I purchased, and I finally added it to my collection to round off my Löwes that, well, you know, were made by Amusing Hobby. So, The kit is fairly prolific, and it's actually one of the more affordable kits by Amusing Hobby, as this one here retails for around 40 to 60 US dollars, and somewhere in between, plus shipping and all that. And these are fairly easily come by on places like eBay, and again, like I said, I picked this one up off of Amazon. Starting with the model's box art and graphic design, the illustration that we have here is pretty decent. Amusing Hobby box arts tend to be pretty good for what they are. We have the vehicle right here dead center. The illustration quality is pretty good. The detailing on the vehicle is, on par with most of the other box art illustrators out there on the market. The setting is supposed to be either Berlin or some other Eastern German type city. At the very tail end of the war, we do have a separated turret here from a Joseph Stalin II with the aerial recognition markings, and it's in the typical time-honored Russian tradition of the turret being blasted off of the lower hull. The remainder of the city scene is pretty nicely rendered overall. We have some nice composition right here with the wall being chipped up from the plaster, and we also have some nice tank obstacles right here in the lower right or left-hand corner, for good measure. Overall, decent composition, and it's a good quality box art with all things considered. The remainder of the graphic design, we have here the Amusing Hobby logo. That's the same logo that they've been using forever, and it's still used today. There's the vehicle's name with the stencil typeface, as well as some other information, the Panzerkampfwagen VII. And that's really all there is to the box art itself. The illustration, actually the illustrator's name is right over there, and the copyright 2013. As I stated before, the kit was released in 2014, so that tracks out. Over here, this is kit number 35A007. Of course, it's World War II, 1/35 scale. On the side portions of the box, we have here the same type of illustration found in the other Amusing Hobby kits. We have a nice little thumbnail of the box art, along with the other important information that I just mentioned. The same thing is true for the opposite side. Carrying on takes you to this section of the box where you get some more information, same stuff as mentioned before, but you also have some CAD sample drawings of the kit's features. And if anyone has ever built the other Löwe kit before, many of these features are going to carry over. What's really cool about the Amusing Hobby kits is they give you a lot of nice things stock and standard out of the box. So things such as photo etch, clear plastic periscope inserts, workable torsion bar suspensions, and to round it off and to complement it, a set of workable track links. This is something that is standard with this kit, and it's important to point out because unlike several other modern contemporary super kit companies where they're giving you a very nicely detailed kit but dicking it up with static individual link and link tracks, this one over here is actually giving you workable track links as a standard feature, which is something that is awesome. Very nice touch indeed. And it's also something that complements the working suspension, as I'll mention as the video progresses. Also on this side here, we got the Facebook logo and a QR code. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you scan that with your phone and it takes you to the Facebook page. I can try it out because, believe it or not, I don't have a smartphone. Yes, I know, it's shocking to some people for me to say that. On the reverse side here, we got the barcode. We also have some corporate information. Amusing Company, in case I didn't mention before, is a Japanese-based model company, and I believe the components are made in Japan. Nope, they're scratch that. They are made in China. However, the company itself is a Japanese-owned company. Over here, we also have a nice little sample side profile shot of the Turm Hinten variant of the Löwe, and it just has some basic painting ideas, such as making it all Panzer gray, which I'm not really sure if that would work, but then again, it is a paper Panzer, so, all bets are off. And it's part of the fun about building a vehicle like this. So, cracking open the box will reveal the inner kit contents. And like I stated before, this is an all injection molded plastic model kit with the exception of the Fred photo etch, and perhaps maybe there might be one or two other metal accessories that are supplied, but we'll see as the video goes on. Also, if anyone has ever seen the other Löwe video, and if you did, of course, thank you for that. But if you did, a lot of the components here are going to be straight up reused and recycled for this kit over here for a reason that should be fairly obvious. So the first runner takes us to the turret. I first want to say that the color on this one here of plastic is a bit different compared to the other one that I built before. If I can remember, that was a darker gray color compared to this one, which is molded in a lighter gray plastic. Take that for what you will. Starting with this runner over here, this is literally the exact same runner that was supplied with the other vehicle. One thing that's really cool about the Löwe is that it features an all-cast turret, which is a departure on German tanks, as generally German tanks utilize mostly a rolled steel construction, and only small fittings were made from castings. Generally, when you think World War II, all large cast sections, you think of the Americans and you think of the Russians. The Germans, that wasn't really their bag. Regardless, the Löwe was going to be the departure from that. So the turret does have some interesting detailing, such as some nice cast texturing that's integrally molded in. Hopefully that comes out on camera. The cast texturing is through and through, and what's nice is that the cast texturing is very deep, which is good on a plastic model like this, because when you build and paint one of these, after you prime it, add the layers of paint and the weathering and the varnish and all that, they tend to fill in some fine cast texturing, and this is something that's seen on many Tamiya models, specifically some of the older ones, where they did have some very finely molded texturing details. However, after a coat or two of paint, you tend to lose that. So this kit here, they definitely compensated for that by giving the cast texturing a nice deep type feel to it, which is again a nice touch. We have here also two options of muzzle brake. We have the E100 style with the perforations, and we also have a standard German type of muzzle brake, a double baffle type system. Again, your choice. We have a single molded barrel, also nice touch. Generally, these are a two-piece assembly you have to do some body work on. Single-piece barrels usually make the job a bit easier. We have the commander's cupola over here. The periscopes are separately molded and are clear inserts, and that is a very nice touch. We also have the mantlet. It has the same type of cast texturing that was mentioned before on the turret. And also on this section over here, we have a jig for assembly of the workable track links, which, from memory serves from the last one, was very, very helpful. Carrying down deeper takes us to another recycled runner, which is the suspension. So here we have the torsion bars as well as the row wheels. The row wheels are your typical late stamped German row wheels, the type you see on the Panther, late versions of the Panther, I should say, and also the King Tiger. The details on the fasteners are pretty good, and we also have the center hub details over there with the small little perforations. And again, very nicely molded. Remember, this kit does date back to 2014, so this detailing here would be basically on par with other vehicles from the contemporary period. Here you can also see the torsion bars. Note they are a single molding and are a very simple installation. They basically just glue in place, and if you do it properly, the pieces will have function to them, which is again a very nice touch. We also have here the hubcaps. They also have their fastener details. The details, you could say, are a bit on the softer end, even though they are there, but compared to some other kits from the same era, from like Dragon comes to mind, these are a little bit on the softer side, but are again more than suffice for the job at hand, and honestly, the need to replace them is definitely not necessary. One thing that's cool about the fasteners, or I should say the hubs, is that they do have the inner section of detailing right there integrally molded on, which is a nice touch, and it's generally overlooked on many kits on the market. And on the real unit here, this wouldn't necessarily be a fastener, but it's actually a lump of steel that's on the casting, and that's done so that they can thread it, and the bolt can thread into that section there. If you ever seen my 1/6 scale late production Tiger or King Tiger videos, I basically mentioned this in more depth, and you get to see what it looks like in a much larger scale. As a quick, shameless plug. We also have some other fittings right here. These are the end cap details for the torsion bars. They are very nicely molded and give the vehicle a lot of nice detailing, specifically on the lower hull sections. And that's going to look really, really good once everything is glued in place. And that's all there is for that. This takes us to yet another shared runner between the two kits, and that gives you some more of the row wheels. The exhaust manifolds, which are a two-piece assembly and are very nicely rendered out. The sprocket, which again is basically King Tiger type. The fasteners look excellent and are nice and molded with the type of quality that they have here. And we also have, on the same token, the rear idler wheels. Again, very nicely rendered as well, with the hubcap and the fastener detailing present. The inner portion of the idlers are properly rendered out as well, and you can also see the final drive running around loose on the inside here, and it's basically on par with the other vehicles of the same period. Or I should say vehicle kits of the same period. We have some nicely rendered little bits here, which are used for the swing arms. These appear to be some restrictors or bump stops, and again, properly rendered out. And we also have the idler mount shafts themselves, which are separately glued, or a separate component, which is something that adds a nice little feature to this build. But from what I remember on the other Löwe, this is something that's going to need a slight little adjustment to, and I'll mention that in more depth as the video continues. Digging down deeper takes us to another recycled runner. Here we have some surface fittings such as hatches, either the bow hatch, which would be these three sections over here, or the rear engine hatch, which is right there. We have the fuel filler caps, the radiator filler cap. We also have the armor sections that are the hull sections that the final drives actually connect to on the reverse side. We have here the exhaust covers, which are blocked off on the bottom, which is something I always generally adjust on these builds. And you'll see more about that as the video goes on. And we have things like the little lift hooks that are for the engine deck. And this here are the side skirt mounts, which are used on the other version of the Löwe. I'm not really sure if the tin work is the same on this one, but you know, I'll see of course as the video progresses. We also have some rear tin work and front tin work right there. Again, the detailing is on par and is quite acceptable for the medium and also the scale that it is. Another recycled part is just a generic German AFV equipment runner, and this comprises of many parts that are basically standard on German World War II tanks. Things like the Pioneer tools and the fire extinguisher, the claws, the tow cable heads, the type of thing that's a good little runner to have if you are designing a German tank model. Detailing on them, on par with basically Dragon and Tamiya. The wooden jack block over here does have some nice wood grain texturing integrally molded on. And basically, again, everything is quite acceptable and is, again, on par with the other manufacturers that I just referenced. Here go the tracks. I'll put a pin in that because I'm going to be circling back to that in a moment. And this takes us to the first runner that is solely for the Turm Hinten version of the Löwe. And this comprises of the upper hull. So taking the unit out of the parts bag, it appears that we have three versions of mantlets. The first was on the turret runner, and the hull gives you literally two more. So that's pretty cool. There's a bunch of different options available. Either this one here, which is completely featureless, there's no other holes or cutouts, or we have this variant here that has these two inlets, which are present. And oddly enough, it appears to be literally the exact same mantlet as the one on the turret sprue. And I have literally no idea why they decided to give you an extra one. So that's a bit strange. But regardless, hey, it's there. The most important aspect of the sprue is, of course, the upper hull section. So this is a bit different compared to the other example of the kit, where the other kit gave you an option between the tin work, where you could either use plastic side tin work sections that get glued on, or you could use photo etch, and that was a nice feature. And on that build, I rolled with the photo etch because it was just a nice feature to have. The plastic ones were fine, but you know, the PE was just better. This one here, that's not the case. This one here, what you see is what you get, and the tin work is integrally molded to the upper hull section. And it's nice and deeply molded, so it's going to weather very, very nicely, specifically with the panel line accent. We also have the very cool shape here of the Turm Hinten variant, and we have some weld beads right here where the panels would interconnect. And the top section does have some very cool and nicely rendered detailing as well. We have the King Tiger-esque grill work right there. And we have the bow hatch section right over there, and has those little locking or hoisting little hooks that are something that I remember having to design on the Armored Type King Tiger, but that's a topic for another video. Basically all of the fittings for the rear portion of the King Tiger are just strewn in this area over here, which again makes it for a nice detailed piece. The next component is the muzzle brake, and this is the same exact styling as the one on the turret runner, only that one the baffles here were solid molded and you have to drill them out with a pin vise. On this one here, they are hollow through and through. This appears to be done with slide molding. Unfortunately, the holes are only two-dimensional, where they're only drilled out on the sides, and the ones on the top here are just impressions. So it's not really doing you any favors per se. Also, with the way the angle of the holes are, I'm on the fence on whether or rather not I'm going to keep this one or use the other one. But regardless, it's here. We also have another molding for the barrel. This one here, it's also a single piece molding. Appears to be much thicker compared to the other option. And unlike the other one, it's solid, or I mean, it's a single piece, but it's a hollow tube. So that's a very nicely engineered piece. We have some other components, such as other versions of the tin work. I'm pretty sure the other ones are probably not going to be used on this build. We have here an antenna base, which looks to be more like an MP65 than something that's German World War II. But again, paper Panzer, anything goes. Here we have some platforms that are, I've seen on some examples, glued to the sides over here, or glued to the sides of the turret. And they have this like diamond plate mesh pattern to them, but they are molded solid. It's going to be also nice to get those painted and weathered. We have here the front armor plate, as well as a chunk of the rear hull right over there. The moldings are, again, nicely rendered out, and they're nice and clean. Again, it should build into a very nice example of this vehicle, all things considered. The next runner we have here is the lower hull, and the lower hull is molded in a different color than the remainder of the vehicle. And this is actually the color that the other Löwe was molded in, so you can see just how different the two colors are side by side. That doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things, but I just want to mention that. This here is obviously specifically for the Turm Hinten variant because of the way the sponsons are shaped. The other version was almost the exact same hull, but with, again, it was custom tailored for that example. It does have the same detailing on the lower panel where we had the escape hatch, as well as some other access panels right here. They are nice and detailed with the way they're molded in. The location where the two plates connect are just like on a King Tiger, where we have this nice little channel right over here where the two sections join, and it is welded with some weld bead detailing molded in. That's a very nice touch. We have the thicker plate here on the front, just like on the King Tiger. And again, welds are through and through throughout the entire section. Again, nicely done overall. The quality and the thickness of the moldings is also very good. It's a thick, chunky molding, which is what you want. More surface area means the glues bind better. It just makes for a stronger model. And again, it's something that's more indicative of higher quality. And this kit definitely does have that. You can see on the inside here how all the torsion bars will be connected in place, as well as how the outer details will all be fitted once the build actually commences. Digging down deeper takes us to the clear runner. Here are the periscope inserts that I touched upon before, and these appear to be the exact same ones from the other kit. As you can see, the Löwe right over there, molded into the identification tab. And this is a very nice feature, and even some Dragon kits give you this thread as well, even though they flip-flop on release on. Sometimes they give it to you, sometimes they don't. It's like, it goes in and out of style. But I personally like the clear inserts. Yes, it does add a little bit more complexity to the build, but in the end, it's great that periscopes are made out of clear plastic. It just gives it just a little bit more accuracy and a little bit more gravitas compared to just having it being able to be painted. Of course, you can paint it. I've done it before. It looks great. But I don't know, there's something about real clear plastic parts. It just adds a little bit of extra more flavor to the build. In a very Tamiya styling, we have some polycaps right over here. That's a nice touch. And on the very bottom of the box, we have here a fret of photo etch, as well as also a decal sheet. The decal sheet is very, very, very rudimentary. It's a generic set of German World War II decals. So we got some iron crosses, as well as just some red numbers with some white strokes on them. Basically, copy-paste, the type of thing that can be used on a multitude of different vehicles. And this takes us to the PE. PE is definitely not something that's generic and specific for this vehicle here. And you can see that it gives you the grille covers, which is generally something you see on a lot of contemporary kits where the PE is supplied and it's not something that needs to be acquired as an aftermarket. As for the quality of the grille work, it's on par with Dragon and all the other kits that give you these pieces. The rest of the photo etch consists of what appear to be fender supports, which was very similar to the other example. And we also have some other bits of detailing. I'm not sure exactly what they are for, but obviously I'm going to find out as the build commences. The PE itself, again, good quality. The thickness is pretty good. It's not overly thin, and it definitely feels like a good quality part. If I was to say what type of brand this PE reminds me of, I'd say it's on par with Trumpeter. That's definitely safe to say. And if anyone wants to see my Trumpeter build, they make excellent kits. So, that's definitely a positive. On the very bottom of the box, we have here the instruction manual. The instruction is a booklet type affair, and it's very nicely made with the CAD drawings that you see here. And from what I can remember on the other Amusing Hobby kit, I had absolutely no problems with following the instructions. There were no misprints or anything like that. But as I often mention in these videos, if there is something that's not correct, I'll most certainly mention it as the video progresses. And it appears to be a very straightforward kit. And on this portion over here, the instructions takes us to the tracks, which bounces us back. Now that is a pretty good transition to the kit supply tracks. So as I mentioned before, this kit supplies you with workable track links. Yes, workable, which means you're not going to hear any complaining from me. I love workable track links on model tank kits, and it's just probably the big brain way to go. Although as much as I love single piece vinyl, for some vehicles, workable track links are definitely objectively the better choice. And on a vehicle like a World War II German tank, that's one of them. Because this vehicle is basically a King Tiger suspension, these type of tracks will flow very, very nicely on the suspension. And because it's a working suspension, the workable track links are the best way to go. Generally, on these kits that have a workable suspension but single-piece vinyl tracks, those two do not really work very well because you tend to need to glue the track to the top of the row wheels. And if you do that, the workable nature is inhibited because to have the track have some sort of flex to it so it can contour, and specifically on the top sections. And if the top sections are glued on, it's just not going to work. You're going to bust glue seams, and it's just going to cause a mess. But the combination of working suspension and workable track links, that's the best way to do it. So the components are in two runners that we have here, and they're molded in this brown plastic, exactly as they were on the other Amusing Hobby kit. I've heard some complaints on these tracks on some of the modeling forums where they're complaining that the tracks are fiddly. Yet, however, these same idiots tout individual link and length, and they say these are fiddly. So they're on another planet, and their opinion should mean less than nothing. For those who are curious out there on these tracks and how they go together, I will actually be making a separate video just on these tracks alone where I'll do a quick little review, and I'll actually have a tutorial on how I go about on putting these tracks together. I was able to have some excellent results with the Löwe that I did, and this one here are probably going to go together probably better since it's my second time around. And this is a video that I'm going to be making individually, and it's going to be posted shortly after this video here makes its debut. So stay tuned for that on the ECA channel. Jumping forward a little bit takes us to the tank. At this point here, it's actually fully assembled and it's ready for painting. The model goes together pretty well, but there's some things I want to mention at this time because, well, as I've often mentioned, it's easier to go at this point here compared to when it's fully painted and weathered. First thing I want to mention is with the front armor plate. So the front armor plate detailing is pretty good for what it is. It does have some nice torch cut lines as well as some weld beads that are integrally present. However, the one thing that is missing is with the side puzzle sections that we have here. This vehicle being similar to the Panther and the King Tiger would have had a puzzle fit type assembly, and so you would have those details continued here on the sides. They are found on the front, but the side sections are bare. So on the model over here, I marked it with a pencil, and then I etched it with a Dremel with a broken micro bit to give me the weld and torch cut details. I show this in some of the other OTR videos, and it does some short work of the procedure. This was done to both sides, and of course this will look much better once everything is fully painted and weathered. The other thing I also want to mention is with the seam lines that are found on where the upper and lower hulls meet, there are some seams that need to be contended with, really easily done with some sandpaper and some thick super glue. The areas that can be a little tricky though are right over here where the final drive is because of the way the tin work is. Trying to get in here with some sandpaper can be a bit problematic, but if you take your time at it, you should be able to have some decent results. And that's it for that, and this brings us to some of the modifications that I made to the build. Of course, as being a mythological beast, you do have quite a range of creative licensing available to you. And the first was going to take us to the bow MG. The model does have a bow MG, but this is representing a plug type system like you would see on the sides of the Elephant or the Ferdinand. But for the model here, I decided it would look much better if it had a standard traditional MG34T in it. So what I did was, luckily in my spare bin, I had a spare Dragon bow MG, probably from one of the Panther builds that I've done in the past. The way Dragon kits are, you do have quite a bit of duplicates. And so I had the piece languishing away, might as well put it to good use. Threw it on the model, threw some cast texturing on it, and once the MG34 gets fitted, it's going to look fantastic. The next detail I added was the little power cables here for the Bosch lights. Just some wire bent to shape. Drilled into the, or I should say the locations were drilled in with a pin vise, and then the wire filled in the area. Nice simple bit of detailing. It's definitely going to look a bit more polished once everything is done. The next thing I want to mention involves probably the biggest oversight on the kit, and that is the exhaust manifolds, or I should say the lack thereof. The model does supply you with a set of exhaust manifolds. However, these are just a carryover from the other Löwe kit and are not intended for use on this one here. The other ones, as we recalled before, are King Tiger pattern, and with the way the kit is designed, there are no provisions or any sort of exhaust to be mounted on this vehicle whatsoever, which is obviously something that is a bit dubious. This being a vehicle powered with internal combustion engine, yes, it's going to have an exhaust manifold. So for the model over here, rather than trying to shoehorn the kit ones, fortunately, on hand, left over from the one Yak Panther, the Tamiya Yak Panther specifically that I did, I had a set of Panther G style of exhaust. So again, might as well put them to good use. Again, with this type of vehicle here, you have lots of creative licensing, and you could basically do anything you want. And in this case, I did. So I went ahead and mounted the exhaust in these two sections over here, as this is where the engine appears to have been. And so the exhaust in this area here is definitely something that would be appropriate. I was trying to see if I could fit it somewhere on the back, but it just seems like it worked out best in this area over here. The Tamiya units were just removed off the sprue and then mounted to the appropriate location. The reason why I didn't roll with the King Tiger pattern of exhaust is because of the size. They're much larger in comparison to the Panther ones, and trying to fit that into this area here with this box was just not going to work. So fortunately, the Panther ones, being low profile, did the build absolutely perfectly. Of course, once these are painted and weathered, it's going to look really great. It's going to be a real focal point of the model. Kind of gives it that like hot rod type appearance, side pipes. But carrying on, the other thing that I deviated on the kit with was with the jack. The jack, they want you to mount it somewhere on the top tin work over here, and they gave you some photo etch for that. Rather than going with that approach, I actually went with the standard King Tiger approach, where I have the jack mounted on the bottom portion. I just used the kit supplied parts, and I mounted them accordingly. And then once everything's painted and weathered, it should look just fine. As for the tools, I'll be touching upon this once the model's finished, but I am going to be basically just winging it with the tools and putting them in places that I deem fit. And because of the exhaust over here, you have to kind of shift everything. The kit does have a format on where they go, but again, creative licensing, it's more of a, let's just say it's more of a guideline than anything else, or suggestion than anything else. The other thing to mention is back to the kit with the photo etch. Photo etch is awesome. I like the thickness of it. It's really sturdy and it's good to work with. I just simply removed it off the sprue, cleaned it up with some sandpaper, and then mounted it to the appropriate locations. It's going to look absolutely perfect once everything is weathered up. On the turret, I went ahead and rolled with this version of the main armament. It just appealed to me. I did have to make some modifications to the mantlet. I drilled out the sections for what would be the optic and the coax. They are not present on the model, so I just drilled them out with a Dremel with a pin vise, or no, Dremel with a small bit, and then cleaned them up with a needle file. The handle over here was supposed to be for the other mantlet, but why let it sit in the spare bin, so I just threw it on top. Of course, I added some cast texturing to this section over here to improve the look, and cast texturing was also added on the two areas where the upper and lower sections of the turret mate. At this point here, this is not yet glued on, because I want to go ahead and thoroughly paint and weather this, as well as the inside portion of the mantlet, just to avoid any sort of missed paint locations, which is something that can and will occur. It's a common mistake a lot of people out there make when they're building one of these models. The side platforms over here, they went on, but again, it's very loosely with the suggestions. There's no clear-cut place to mold, or where it's molded in, saying where to stick these things. So you basically just have to test fit and then glue accordingly. But if you take your time, it should work out just fine. Oh, on the muzzle over here, I actually went ahead and re-drilled out all of the ports with a pin vise. The ports are integrally molded on, but they're only molded on to the sides, and because it's slide molded, the holes are a bit strange in their appearance. It's nice that they are hollow, but to improve them further, with a pin vise, I just went in straight with every one of these holes over here. And now if you look at the unit, you can see that the holes are all going inward as opposed to being sideways. And if anyone has seen the original one, you'll know what I'm talking about. Overall, this is going to weather very well once everything is painted. That's all there is to that. Oh, the one last thing I do want to mention, I can't believe I almost forgot, is with the idler mounts. So the rear idler mounts are not fitted at this point because these are going to be added after the track is installed. And with the way I remember the last Löwe, the idler was a bit too loose, and so, or I should say, it's too tight if you use a certain number of links, but because it's a King Tiger pattern track, you have to have two, it then becomes too loose. So it's either a bit on the tighter end or it's a bit on the looser end. So for this year, to alleviate that, I have the idler where it's going to be adjusted. So once I drop the track in place, I can actually adjust the idler much along the lines I do on my armor tags. In order to do that, though, there is a half round section integrally molded into the swing arm as well as also into the area over here, so it locks in a certain way. And in order to get the adjustability, I have to go ahead and delete that. So with a Dremel with a router bit, I went in there and I removed that bit of material, so now the piece can just pivot freely, and then once it comes time for final installation, I could go ahead, set it, add a little drop of glue in there, and that'll lock it in place, and the track will be at the correct tension. Same thing was also done to the opposite side. No modifications need to be done to the actual swing arm itself. The half round section can remain. This is just a receptacle over here that has to be removed and deleted. Of course, you'll be seeing more of this in the companion video to this build over here, where I go over the workable tracks. With the model fully completed, we'll go ahead and start with the suspension. All the suspension work that you see here is all stock with the model, with the exception of the rear idler mod that I referenced earlier, so that I could adjust the track tension and fine-tune it to a point that makes it more easily adjusted compared to the way it's shoehorned with the out-of-the-box offering. As for the wheels themselves, they go on without any sort of problems, and the kit assembles very nice in that regard. The pieces are very nicely detailed and hold on to paint and the panel line accent excellently. Because these are steel-rimmed wheels, I went ahead and painted all of the rims to replicate the steel look, which of course would be appropriate for a vehicle like this. Also, because these are King Tiger pattern of wheels, on the center portion here of all the hubcaps, we have a Zerk fitting, which of course is used to grease the inner bearings of all of these sections over here. And in true ECA fashion, I went ahead and painted all of these little sections with a little drop of red paint. In addition to the red paint, I also added a little drop of Tamiya Gloss Clear to these sections over here, just to give a little bit of extra sweat effects, which again, would be appropriate for these type of fittings. In addition to being done to the road wheels, I also went ahead and added the same little effect right over here to the Zerk fitting found on the sprocket. And also on the idler over here, hopefully it comes on camera, but there's a little bit of sweat going on around the center hub. Of course, the model suspension is fully articulating. As you can see, it has a nice little spring to it. If I go ahead and place the screwdriver here on the table and place the tank on top of it, you can see the suspension in action. As you can see, it's a very nice feature that this kit gives you out of the box, and the combination of the working suspension with the workable track links really lends itself for some excellent detailing, and again, it's a very nice feature that this kit does have. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there are several other kits on the market that have a feature similar to this being a working suspension. However, they kind of screw up the track option that is supplied with the kit. Some kits out there have a fully sprung working suspension, only to then go ahead and negate it completely by giving you static individual link and link tracks, which the logic behind that is completely just baffling to me. But the other mistake that some kids do is they give this suspension with a single piece vinyl track. And although I'm a huge fan and proponent of single piece vinyls, for a model specifically of this type of a pattern, like a King Tiger, a Panther, Tiger One, and similar, where we have this design of track, The single-piece vinyls with the working suspension is not really that great because with the single-piece vinyls, you have to glue the track to the top portions of the wheels. And this becomes problematic when it comes time for articulating the suspension. You can see how the track needs to readjust when the suspension is articulated. And if the single-piece vinyls are glued to the top of the road wheels, it's going to cause some problems, and it's not really going to work too well in that regard. The best way, of course, is with workable track links when you have a suspension on a vehicle like this. And this kit definitely went about the correct way, or the more appropriate way, for giving you both the design of the working suspension as well as also with the type of track that's applied with the kit. In case anyone is wondering, yes, there are aftermarket tracks out there in case you do not want to use the stock ones for one reason or another. This being essentially a King Tiger pattern of vehicle, you can just swap these out with a set of workable track links that are made out of metal from Fruli or any of the other manufacturers that are out there that have King Tiger track links in metal. I'm pretty sure those will be able to work with this kit here without any sort of problems. As for the stock kit track, as you can see, it times absolutely perfectly with the sprocket over here, and there's no timing issues that can potentially happen on some other kits that I've personally ran into the past. Namely, of course, I'm singling out the Hobby Boss T29 heavy tank. That was a bit of a handful trying to deal with, but on this one over here, that's not the case, and the tracks time perfectly and effortlessly with the stock sprocket. So again, the kit's nicely engineered in that regard. Carrying on to the rear section over here, as I mentioned before, when I mounted the exhaust manifolds to the side portions of the hull, I needed to reorganize and readjust some of the layout of some of the tools, and the jack here was definitely one of them. Here you can see what it looks like with the jack readjusted, and it just fits into this area over here without any sort of problems. Essentially, like I may have mentioned before, I went with the King Tiger route, so having the jack in this section over here is definitely something that is plausible. Moving our way to the front of the model takes us back to the bow MG. As I referenced before, this is not kit supply and it was a spare from my spare parts bin. However, as you can see at the moment, there's no bow MG fitted in place. At the moment, I don't have any on stock. I did pick up a set. They are coming in of aftermarket brass ones, and I will most certainly add them to this model when they do arrive. However, since this section is removable, it's not a problem with having the piece omitted at this time, but if you're watching this video, rest assured, yes, the bow MG will be fitted in place as soon as I get the parts from the supplier, which may or may not be the subject matter of its very own review video, who knows. But anyway, rest assured, yes, this thing will eventually get its bow MG fitted in place and balance will be brought back to the force. But for the time being, the unit is just going to stay in the format that we have here. As for fitting into place, obviously I just drilled a small little hole out with a pin vise, stick it in with a little bit of glue, and we'll be good to go. However, as for the paintwork itself, like I referenced before, some cast texturing was added to this section over here, and now that's all painted and weathered, you really get to see that cast texturing coming out, and it gives the piece a bit more accuracy, as well as some detailing. Also, on that note, you can see the headlight conduits that I referenced before. Again, everything always looks better when it's fully painted and weathered. Continuing along with the tin work, you get to see the tool layout that has been configured on this model. As I mentioned before, this was adjusted somewhat, and what you see here is a mix of where the kit originally suggested you to put the tools, as well as some other places that I personally just felt that they would be a better fit. So what you see here was the final outcome, and I think it turned out pretty well. The tools themselves are painted and weathered in my usual format. On the cleaning staves that are mounted right over here, you see I went with my other German format, where the rods themselves are replicated to look like wood. However, again, I always mention this in these videos, the end connectors that are used to telescope everything together are made out of brass, so I went ahead and carefully painted them with a little swipe of gold paint, which does replicate brass pretty well. On this one here, you'll notice that the swipe is slightly longer. This was done intentionally because on the very last stave, where the actual swab gets screwed in place, the fitting is slightly longer on some examples of German tanks out there that I personally have seen. So I just carefully brought that little bit of detailing on this build over here. It's one of those little subtle bit of details that some people may not notice, or some people might even think it's a mistake, but rest assured that is the case, and I've seen on several other larger scale builds that are out there. Hopping to the reverse side, you can see the remainder of the tools continued. We have here the jack block, the Tetra fire extinguisher, as well as the other remaining Pioneer tools. We also have here the stock antenna base, and to just finish it off, I painted it in the same manner that I paint my other World War II German AFE antenna bases, where the bottom portion is actually made out of rubber, and I painted the stem where the wire would plug into out of brass. On this one here, I left the wire off just because it kind of gets in the way with rotating the turret, so I just omitted the wire for this example. Again, that's not inaccurate because these things are removable. Of course, this leads us directly to the exhaust manifolds that I referenced before, and fully painted and weathered, they look really, really good, and they give just so much extra detailing and a focal point to this section that I just referenced earlier in the video. And on the reverse side, you can see the effects in better light. It's the exact same effects that went on the one on the reverse side, but with that big box in the way, it's a little bit trickier to get the camera in. However, hopefully this comes out better on this portion of the vehicle. So the exhausts are weathered my usual format with the use of sophisticated finishes, rusting agent for the actual manifold itself. This is brushed on, then a catalyst is painted over with the paintbrush, and this actually forms the rust to grow naturally, and it's real rust, so it looks fantastic on exhaust manifolds, and it's generally how I render them. The heat shields themselves are airbrushed with a little bit of rust paint, giving you for the burned, slight char, and surface rust effects that you see on these sections here, which for a heat shield would definitely be true to form. For the last effect, the little poofs here on the, or I should say just the carbon fouling themselves on the tips of the exhaust manifolds. This is just done with Tamiya flat black via the airbrush. A few little strategic toots here and there with the area shielded with a index card. It's what's done in order to get the effects in the final form that you see here. On the rear portion of the tinwork, we have the convoy lights. Again, this is something that a lot of people tend to omit and overlook on their German vehicles when the pieces are literally supplied, and the only thing you have to do with it as a builder is paint them, regardless of the build or the make. A lot of people out there tend to forget these. On the one here on the left-hand side, this is the blackout light, and this one's rendered with the little swing plate in the downward position, which means we have the little squares that are exposed. This is quite customarily seen on a lot of 135s and larger scale models that are out there. And as for the little squares on the real German tanks, they would be green in color. So a little drop here of, I use old school Testors enamel green paint. It fits the bill perfectly for something like this. However, I'm not sure if Testors paints are still around. If they are, use those. If not, try to find an alternative. As long as it's green and gloss like this over here, it'll fit the bill perfectly. On the reverse side here, we have the other convoy light, and this is something that's actually in two colors, and a lot of people out there, again, either omit this or they paint the unit incorrectly. I've even had some dude was arguing with me one time because I did something like this on my 1/6 scale Panzer II, and it wasn't until I literally showed him pictures of the real one where he's conceded. But either way, this is something that leads to a bit of contention on a lot of builds out there, and this is how the unit is properly painted. We have the top lens here, which is a cat's eye shape, as is the one on the bottom, but the one on the top is painted in orange, while the one on the bottom is painted in red. Of course, you want to use gloss for both of these, and when you're done, this here is the final effect. These type of taillights are very common on more earlier pattern of German tanks, so you'll see them on Panzer IIs, some Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs of the early pattern, and not to mention the Panzer I. And also the 222 is another notable example where we have taillights like this. And if you see these on your build, just be sure to paint them accordingly, and the build will be better for it. Also, as I mentioned before, the photo etch was added to the appropriate locations, and the photo etch looks excellent. It has a nice scale thickness to it, and the quality of the PE is nice and sturdy on this kit, as I referenced before. And this brings us really to the top deck. The top deck details are excellent. They went together very well. Starting with the bow section here, we have the periscopes, as well as also there's another one here on the turret. These are molded in a multimedia type assembly where the guard and the mount itself are standard opaque plastic, while the lens insert itself is made out of clear. As I referenced before, this is a very nice type feature, but it's one that does require just a little bit extra paintwork and finesse in order to get the full effect out of it. On these units over here, these are actually the last units to be fitted to the model along with the PE that I'll touch upon in a moment. But on the periscopes, basically I assemble the guards with the bases like you see here, and I paint and weather them off of the model, and then at the very tail end I install the clear periscope prism and then drop the unit into place. This is the best way to ensure that the prism does not get any sort of overpaint or overspray on it from just the remaining of the paintwork. As for the prisms themselves, again, they are painted off of the model while still on the sprue, and you can see that I painted them with a little bit of Tamiya NATO brown, or possibly even red brown. Either will work just fine. And they are painted on all of the 3 locations, the 2 on the sides and the top. However, the actual lens itself is not painted whatsoever, and as you can see, it has a very, very realistic look to it that you can see right here. And this effect is not something that you could mimic with just trying to render opaque plastic to look like lenses. Is it possible? Yes, it can be done. Obviously, I do it on my builds where I paint the little lens with a little bit of gloss black. However, this type of setup over here is definitely more realistic. And again, it's just one of those things that are indicative of a nice quality build. Admittedly, again, it adds more complication to the build. It adds another step, more complexity. But it's one of those things where if you take your time and you are navigating the waters appropriately, it just really enhances the build immensely. And jumping forward a little bit, the same exact thing was done here on the Commander's cupola. Only on the cupola, because the turret is removable, you get full access to install these units from the inside, and that does simplify things immensely. For this section here of the hull, you can't exactly fit the periscope in with your fingers, which is why it's best to install these units after everything is already painted. Continuing back takes us to the driver's section. This goes together pretty straightforwardly. However, one thing about the Panther and King Tiger, and as in association to those, the Löwes, is that you have to be careful with these little hooks that we have here that are needing to be glued in place. These things are always really problematic on these patterns of vehicles. On a Panther and Tiger, or I should say a King Tiger, it's even worse because there's just a ton of them on the rear engine deck. Same also is true for the E100. But on this one over here, it's not too bad. There are only 2, but these are the type of pieces that just love to fling off the Lost Party. So again, be very careful with deburring, removing off the sprue, and fitting in place. Not to mention just general handling with the model, because these are the type of things I love to bump off very easily. You won't notice it until the model is finished. Never something that's great to happen to you. So just pay attention to those and you should be okay. On the remaining sections, we have here the filler caps. I rendered them in my usual manner with the effects of paint spillage, and, or I should say fuel and oil spillage. And this is just done with just some Tamiya gloss black, as well as also just some Tamiya gloss clear added with the paintbrush for the following effects. Just gives a little extra life to the build as opposed to just leaving it clean. On the grillwork sections, you get to see what the PE looks like fitted in place. Now, the PE, like I mentioned before, is something that's added at the very tail end of the build because, again, PE is one of those things that just loves to get oversprayed or clogged up very quickly when it comes time for painting. Painting PE mesh is truly a skill set in its own right. And I've seen a lot of builds out there from novices to even professionals where they have the build that looks excellent, and you look at the PE, and the damn grills are clogged with paint. You really have to have the correct distance when you're applying the paint, either via spray can if you're going with the primer, and also with the airbrush when it comes time for the base coat, the weathering, and all that. Also, this is definitely true to effect when it comes time for varnishing. Varnish loves to get in here and clog up your grills, so you definitely want to navigate those waters appropriately. Some builds, I don't even varnish the PE. I just add at the very tail end after the varnish is concluded, just to avoid any sort of mishaps of the thing getting clogged. On this one over here, I think I may have varnished them. Honestly, I don't remember if I did or didn't, but I do remember that, again, PE is added at the very tail end of the build, and if you do everything appropriately, this is the effect that you will have, and you'll notice that the PE is totally intact without anything getting clogged or any other types of issues along those lines. Moving up to the turret takes to the platforms. As you can see, it gives the model a nice distinctive shape with these strange looking teardrop type platforms here and here. The meshwork, or I should say the diamond plate type effects, are technically molded on. They're nice and deep, and they look great once they're painted. They hold it to me a panel line accent excellently. You just go in there, it's kind of like pouring syrup on your waffles type thing. It holds it in those deep recesses, and it's done much along the same lines. Just go in there with the paintbrush, you add in the area, wipe it off, and this is essentially what your end result will be, and it just looks great. Again, nice interesting difference between this version of the Löwe and the other variant. On the front portion, this takes us to, again, the mantlet. As I mentioned before, this received a bit of extra work and modification just to polish up to the way we see it here. The cast texturing should be coming out in full effect now with the camera zoomed in and in focus, as well as also the addition of the coax MG and the optic. Again, the coax just gets a little bit of toots over there from the airbrush, to me a flat black for the powder fouling effects, and that's really all there is. The addition of that hook on the top really, again, just makes the model look that much more complete and just gives extra detailing where none existed. On the remaining portion of the main armament, again, it's a nice assembly. This was the version that was molded solids, or I should say through and through. There's no two half assemblies to deal with, just a little bit of polishing where the two mold lines met, so that was done with a little bit of sandpaper. And the muzzle brake definitely looks much better compared to the way we had originally. As I mentioned before, I had to go in there with a pin vise to drill out the sections so that the holes are all going in the same direction, as well as also the ones that were just shallow molded on the top, and they have been drilled out through and through. Once everything is painted and weathered to the way we see it here, it just looks absolutely excellent. And definitely, in my opinion, is one of the high points on this kit, because these type of muzzle brakes just look killer on these really late war, or in this case, paper Panzer type vehicles. One thing that I like about the Löwe kits is that with the way the kit is designed, you do have some poly caps that are in this trunnion section over here, and this gives the barrel a little bit of stiffness, so it's still fully adjustable as you can see. However, the likelihood of it drooping is much reduced. This is something that's very important to mention, specifically on these German World War II tanks that have these really long barrels on them. Because of gravity being what it is, a lot of time puts extra weight on the trunnion section, and they tend to droop like this. If that happens, not really a problem. You add a little drop of white glue to the trunnion section, that usually stiffens things up. But I do like the design of the poly caps over here, because the need to add the glue wasn't necessary. Also, as I mentioned before, the kit gives you several options of main ordnance. I went with this one over here, but you could easily swap it out with any of the other versions that are kit supplied for your Löwe needs. As for this one here, since I built the other Löwe with the long skinny one, I wanted the big, thick, chunky variant for this example.
Yeah, boy.
Also on the topic of the cast texturing, as I mentioned before, the cast section was added on the sections where the turret has met together, and once everything's painted and weathered, it blends in absolutely seamlessly. And this brings us back to the roof. So here we have the loader's hatch, again, just kit supplied, no other mods need to be mentioned about that, as well as the cupola. As I mentioned before, the periscopes are really the only thing of mention, and these were glued in from the inside, again, for the reasons that I touched upon before. For glue, I actually use white glue to secure these things in place, because again, white glue, unlike super glue, does not fog anything up, and also is not detrimental to the plastic. So in case there's a mishap or two, you simply just wipe the thing clean and reapply, or I should say reattempt the installation, and hopefully it works better on the second try. If you're using cement or super glue, it's a little bit more problematic. And that's all there is to mention about the build itself, and this takes us to the paint and the markings. So for the model's paint work, obviously you have full creative licensing to do essentially whatever you want. So on this one here, I went with a Panzer Gray base with what we know around my shop as the Kharkov pattern, where it's Panzer Gray with Dunkelgelb airbrushed on in a camouflage type pattern. However, for this one here, I decided to do something a little bit different, where in addition to the standard Kharkov type scheme, I added the bubble octopus pattern, which is generally something that we see on very late war type German vehicles, like some of the late King Tigers, and it's just a indicative type camouflage pattern for the Panzer 46 type vehicles. And for the Löwe over here, it's more than appropriate. So I went with the bubble type pattern, and the bubbles are painted with the Dunkelgelb, and they were applied to the locations that you see here. It gives the vehicle a nice, interesting look, and something a bit different compared to your beaten path type German paint job. For the base coat itself, well, first, the entire model, of course, is thoroughly primed in flat black spray paint, and then for the base coat, I went with my exterior latex house paint. Again, pisses people off out there when they hear that, but if it works, it works, and I went ahead and made my own mix of Panzer Gray. This is the same color that I've used on many other builds found on this channel, both small and large, and this was applied via the airbrush. Once it was applied for the camouflage itself, I went with Tamiya Dunkelgelb acrylics. That was applied via the airbrush, and then the bubbles were all applied via the paintbrush. Of course, the bubbles are also the same Tamiya Dunkelgelb that I referenced before for the camouflage pattern. The paintbrush technique, again, as I often reference, you have to be on the ball with the consistency, also the paintbrush quality. If the consistency of the paint is too thin, it's going to run all over the place. Too thick, it's going to be a bit too chunky, neither of which are doing you any favors. If it's diluted just right, the paint will have a nice flat appearance on the model, and it'll just look like it's basically just part of the surface. For the remainder of the weathering, this was utilizing the same techniques that I often use and reference on my builds, which include both the use of airbrushing and dry brushing. For the airbrushing effects, we have some washes going on over here for the sun fading effects, and then we also have some counter shading, which is using diluted Tamiya flat black in order to airbrush into certain locations, giving you that counter shaded look. Then Tamiya panel line accent was used throughout the build to really sink into those crevices over there, really highlighting them. It's a great product. I love using that stuff. It's fantastic, specifically for things like the crevices for the panels where they all intersect, the diamond plate, just stuff like that. The Tamiya panel line accent is just excellent. The model also has the flat black dry brushing effects for the paint chips that, again, it's quite customarily seen on my builds. And then from there, it got its markings. For the markings, I used the kit supply water slide decals. As I mentioned before, they're very simplistic in the type of decals given. For this one, I just went with the German crosses. I didn't need to put the numbers on it, but hey ho, do what you wish. Again, paper Panzer, have fun with it. For the crosses, I went again just conservative with the markings. Just the 2 crosses on either side of the turret was more than suffice, and the quality of the markings are excellent. They went on without any sort of problems. And then to seal everything up, you guessed it, I used my tried and true best friend, the VMS matte varnish. Stuff was applied with the airbrush. It went on flawlessly. It did a fantastic job making sure that the decals don't have any silvering on them. They just are nice and flat. They're secured. I don't have to worry about them flaking away as the model ages. I absolutely love that stuff. On top of that, the varnish goes all over the rest of the model, and it looks excellent. It's just one of those things that really makes the model look that much polished and just that much more, well, complete, lack of a better phrase. Of course, it would be complete video malpractice to have made this video and reference the other Löwe the entire time without it making a cameo appearance. So, straight out of the collection, here we have, for the first time in several years, the other version of the Amusing Hobby Löwe that was built. Of course, this one here is the subject matter of its very own model showcase video, as I also referenced before, and the link to this video can be found in the video description. It's also pretty cool to have the 2 kits side by side, so you really get to appreciate and compare and contrast the 2 different designs, where we have the standard configuration Löwe over here, compared to its bullpup eyes Turm Hinten counterpart. You can also see the 2 calibers side by side and the 2 options that again are kit supplied. This one here has the longer, skinnier, higher velocity ordnance, while this one here has the thicker, shorter, but larger caliber ordnance. And you can definitely see exactly how much bigger the other one is just by comparing the size of the muzzle. Like I referenced before, this kit does supply you with the exact same pieces that we have here, as well as the same mantlet, no less. As you can see, this one's got the slots in it, this one didn't. And of course, you could render this kit with the same components if you so deem fit. I also believe on this variant, it had a different option for the muzzle brake, where it's more of a traditional looking German muzzle brake. Of course, I went with the ventilated one because it looks awesome, but that is another option. You could render the kit if you so deem desire. I also want to say that it feels fantastic to have both examples in the collection, and technically speaking, the collection's finished. I got both examples of the Löwe, and that doesn't really happen very much in this field because there's so many kits out there, and they're all excellent, they're really, really cool. It's kind of hard to go ahead and literally get one of each in a certain family, but here we can see I have literally one of each of the Löwes from Amusing Hobby, and it feels awesome. Technically speaking, I could build a few different variants of either kit, again with a different ordnance and things like that. Is this something that is likely to happen? Probably not. However, I'm not going to rule it out entirely. Stranger things have happened, but it's something that's not necessarily something I'm looking forward to or even have interest in. But at least I do have 2 of the baseline examples of the Löwe in my collection. Is there room for more? Yeah, who knows. But again, it just depends on which way the wind blows. But for now, I'm pretty content with having these 2 examples here. And they do look awesome, I might add. At the end of the day, there's nothing really much more I could have wanted, anticipated, or expected out of this build that I didn't get with the final end result. This model here was as fun as it was interesting, and I had an absolute blast while working on it. And as I mentioned before, since I already have the other version of the Löwe, having this one to round off the collection really feels great, and it just feels just that much more of an accomplishment. And that is the perfect point to pivot us into skill level and recommendation. So straight out of the gate, if you are a beginner and never touched a plastic model kit before, then this is definitely not going to be the kit for you. I cannot recommend this to someone who is a beginner. Even though, oddly enough, the majority of the build is pretty easy and goes together pretty well, it is very Tamiya-esque in many aspects. The number one place where a beginner is just going to fumble and have a lot of difficulty with is most certainly with the workable track. The workable track counterbalances the simplicity nature of the build with the complexity and fiddliness that workable track link assembly does have. And a beginner just does not have these skill sets lined up. Neither do they have the tooling required to go ahead and execute them. And execute them in a way that they remain workable. This is something that's best left up to someone that has a number of builds under their belt, someone who's really, really comfortable with working in plastic models, probably about a dozen or so builds, and by that point there, it's safe to say that you are an intermediate builder. An intermediate builder can most definitely tackle one of these models where they can easily assemble the remainder of the hull, the turret, all that good stuff, and that's going to be fairly easy, but they should definitely have the skill set and the comfort level to working with the workable track. If you are someone that has those skill sets and you feel comfortable with working with workable tracks, then this kit here definitely becomes something that's viable and most certainly something to consider. Along similar lines, if you're someone that is looking to get a kit that has some photo etch but are not looking for something that's overly complex with photo etch, this kit here also becomes something to keep in consideration. Unlike some of the other models I brought about on the table in the past, such as the Mini Art SU 12254 build that I did a little while ago, that one was a masterclass in photo etch. And compared to this one over here, that would be a symphony, this would be a grunt. So that's how simplified the photo etch is on this model, which again, if you're an intermediate builder, that's exactly what you want. You want to find something that has some PE, you get to work with it, but it's not something that's overly complex or strenuous that's going to really give your build experience difficulty. And you can get your feel of the material with working on a simplistic build like this, and it's definitely one, again, that'll help you in the long run. And after a build like this one over here, you should get the feel and the comfort level built up with working with some simple PE, and from there you could springboard off into something that has a little bit more challenging and complex PE, but because you have a good feel for the material and the skills with working on the basic handling of the stuff, you could definitely have a better outcome compared to just jumping into the deep end from the get-go. Needless to say, an advanced builder can definitely tackle one of these models, and they could probably do so with their eyes closed. Arguably, they might even find the kit to be overly simplistic in some respects, but with its unique subject matter over here, this definitely does compensate for the relative simplicity. And because of this vehicle being what it is, there are lots of aftermarket components out there that can be added to the model to enhance it further. Because this does share a lot of similar detail components with vehicles like the King Tiger and similar, those modifications and extra add-ons can be added to this thing over here to improve it further from what you see here in my video. In my opinion, though, it's a really good model and solid for what it is, so you could just either go conservative like I did and build it relatively out of the box, or you could go ahead and go crazy with it with some extra fittings that you so deem fit. This being a paper Panzer, of course, opens up complete creative licensing, and you could go as conservative or as crazy with it as you desire. And there's really nothing much more needs to be said about that, and this takes us directly into recommendations. So straight out of the gate, if you are into building and collecting examples of World War II German armor, the Löwe here is definitely recommended. If you're the type of person that loves to build and collect examples of what I like to call the German zoo, you need a lion in your zoo, and this one here fits that bill perfectly. Along similar lines, if you're into prototype or experimental vehicles, the Löwe here cannot be recommended enough. If you're the type of person that has the Moss, the E100, any of the other tanks from the E series, or hell, even the American T95 or T28 Super Heavy Tank, the IS-7, or anything along those lines, this kit here would fit and enhance that collection swimmingly. Well, not just this one, but also the other version of the Löwe. And again, chances are if you like this one, you're definitely going to dig that kit and vice versa. Obviously, if you're into playing those online tank games, this kit here is definitely one that's going to be on your radar. If not, you're going to be really interested in it because you may or may not like to play with it in the video game. If that's you, that's awesome, but you need to pump your brakes. To what I stated before, this kit's not beginner friendly, but if you're a guy that has your intermediate or advanced skills built up and you like playing in the video game, boom, the addition of this kit in your collection is definitely one that will make you feel really, really fulfilled on the inside. I also recommend this kit for anyone who's just looking for something different. I've mentioned this in a few other videos on subject matter similar to this, and again, the same exact thing comes to mind here. If you're the type of person that's already built a plethora of all the other traditional standard vehicles on the market and are just looking for something that's a breath of fresh air, paper panzers are always something that scratches that itch immensely, and it gives you something that's very unique, very interesting to have in your collection. If that's you, this kit here is beyond recommended. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for the 1/35th scale Turm Hinten variant of the German Löwe heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being small scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other type of content being large scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.